Be honest with yourself for once, not with your friends, not with your friends, not with the internet, with yourself. Your life isn't changing, not because you lack opportunity, not because the world is unfair, not because people betrayed you, or circumstances were difficult. Those are convenient stories. They help you sleep. They protect your ego. They also keep you stuck. If someone else were the problem, change would have happened the moment they left. If money were the problem, discipline would show up the moment you earned more. If motivation were the problem, you'd already be different after all the videos you've watched. But you're still here, same patterns, same delays, same excuses, dressed up as self-awareness. That's not bad luck. That's ownership you've been avoiding. This isn't meant to insult you. It's meant to wake you up, because until you accept this truth, nothing improves. You know what? Citra's wrong. That Citra's not the problem. You've already done the hardest part intellectually. You can sit down and explain your situation clearly. You can talk about your childhood, your trauma, your habits, your fears, your triggers, your patterns. You can even explain why you behave the way you do. That level of awareness makes you feel evolved. It makes you feel like you're already on the path. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Awareness by itself changes nothing. Awareness is diagnosis, not treatment. Knowing you're unhealthy doesn't heal you. Knowing your finances are a mess doesn't fix them. Knowing your habits are destructive doesn't stop them. It only tells you what is wrong, not who you are becoming. Most people get stuck here because awareness feels productive without demanding sacrifice. You can think, you can analyze, you can journal, you can watch videos, you can talk about healing. All of it feels like movement. None of it requires risk. That's why awareness is seductive. It gives you the illusion of growth while protecting you from discomfort. Observation without responsibility is just another form of avoidance. You say, at least I'm self-aware, but self-awareness that doesn't lead to action isn't a strength, it's a delay tactic. It's the mind convincing itself it's improving, so it doesn't have to change behavior. Real growth is not dramatic. It doesn't come with breakthroughs every day. It's repetitive, dull, and humbling. It's waking up and doing the same uncomfortable thing again, even when the insight no longer excites you, especially when it doesn't. Think about how this shows up in real life. You're aware you procrastinate, but you still delay starting. You're aware you overthink, but you still sit in thought instead of motion. You're aware your phone is destroying your focus, but you still reach for it. You're aware certain people drain you, but you still stay accessible. You're aware your routines are weak, but you still protect them. At some point, awareness becomes an excuse. A polished one. A socially acceptable one. People will even praise you for it. You're so self-aware. You understand yourself so well. Meanwhile, your life looks the same year after year. That's not wisdom, that's stagnation with vocabulary. Here's the part most people don't want to hear. Insight expires quickly. It has a short shelf life. If it doesn't turn into action, it turns into guilt. And guilt, when ignored, turns into numbness. That's why you feel tired of working on yourself. Not because growth is exhausting, but because you've been thinking instead of doing. Thinking burns energy without producing results. Action produces results even when it's messy. Another hard truth: awareness feels safer than action because action exposes you to failure. Awareness keeps everything hypothetical. You can stay in the realm of potential instead of reality. As long as you sit aware, you can say, I could change if I wanted to. Action removes that excuse. Action forces you to confront what you're actually capable of right now. That's such terrifying for the ego. So people stay aware, they stay informed, they stay reflective, and they stay the same. You don't need more clarity. You already have enough to change your life. What you lack is follow-through. And follow-through doesn't come from understanding yourself better. It comes from doing what you already understand, especially when you don't feel like it. Notice how children learn. They don't analyze walking for months. They fall, stand up, fall again, and eventually walk. No deep insight, no identity work. Just repetition. Somewhere along the way, you were taught that you must fully understand yourself before you're allowed to act. That's false. Action creates understanding, not the other way around. You will never think your way into discipline. You will never analyze your way into courage. You will never journal your way into consistency. Those qualities are built through behavior, not reflection. This doesn't mean awareness is useless. It means awareness is only the first step, and it's the smallest one. The real work begins the moment awareness ends and action starts. Ask yourself this honestly. What do I already know that I am not acting on? That question alone exposes the gap. You don't need a new strategy. You don't need a new explanation. You don't need another realization. You need to stop negotiating with what you already know. Because if knowing were enough, your life would already look different. It doesn't, Ted. And that's not because you're incapable. It's because you've mistaken understanding for effort and insight for progress. Action is the work. Everything else is preparation. You keep postponing your life while waiting to become ready. Ready to start, ready to commit, ready to be disciplined, ready to be confident, ready to change. That version of you never arrives. Not because you're broken, not because something is wrong with you, but because readiness is not a state you enter, it's a result you earn after you act. This is one of the most common traps intelligent people fall into. You tell yourself a convincing story, I just need a bit more clarity, a bit more stability, a bit more confidence. You frame it as patience or self-compassion, but underneath it's fear of beginning imperfectly. You're not waiting for readiness, you're waiting for certainty. And certainty never comes before action. Look closely at your language. When I feel motivated, when my confidence improves, when life calms down, these are conditions you've attached to action so you don't have to face discomfort now. The problem is that life doesn't reward conditional effort, it rewards movement. Confidence is not something you discover inside yourself, it's something you build through evidence. Every time you act despite discomfort, you prove to yourself that you can handle pressure. Every time you delay, you prove the opposite. That's why waiting makes you weaker. The longer you wait to start, the heavier starting feels. Not because the task changed, but because your self-trust eroded while you delayed. You stopped believing your own timelines. You stopped respecting your own intentions. This is why starting feels so hard now. Not because the task is big, but because you've trained yourself to hesitate. Most people think discipline appears first and action follows. That's backwards. Discipline is the muscle built by acting without it. You don't wake up disciplined. You wake up undecided. Discipline forms when you choose action anyway. Waiting for a better version of yourself is a way of rejecting who you are right now. And when you reject who you are now, you sabotage the only person capable of changing your life. Here's another uncomfortable truth. The version of you that starts messy is the only version that ever succeeds. There is no clean beginning. There is no emotionally perfect launch point. Every real transformation begins while you feel unsure, inconsistent, and unprepared. People who succeed don't feel more ready than you. They simply act while feeling unready. You tell yourself you'll start when you're confident, but confidence is a memory. It comes from remembering past wins. If you don't act, you don't accumulate wins. If you don't accumulate wins, confidence never arrives. So you wait, and the waiting becomes your identity. Over time, this waiting creates a dangerous internal split. You have the version of you who knows what should be done and the version of you who avoids doing it. The gap between them creates shame. Shame drains energy. Drained energy, reinforces avoidance. That sits the cycle you stuck in. And here's the brutal part, no one is coming to pull you out of it. No moment will magically feel right. No internal switch will flip. You have to move while doubting yourself. That's what growth actually looks like. It's not bold. It's not cinematic. It's quiet defiance against your own hesitation. Another lie you tell yourself is that you're working on yourself before you begin, but most self-work that delays action is just mental rehearsal without performance. Athletes don't get stronger by visualizing alone. They lift weight, they strain, they fail, reps. That strain is what creates capacity. You cannot think your way into a new life. You must behave your way into it. The version of you that you're waiting for is created by doing the things you're avoiding, not before. Every day you delay, you reinforce the identity of someone who waits. Every day you act, even imperfectly, you reinforce the identity of someone who moves. Identity follows behavior, not intention. Ask yourself something honestly, how long have you been preparing? Months, years? How much more proof do you need before you accept that preparation without execution is just disguised fear? You already know what to do next, not the whole plan, just the next step, and the next step doesn't require confidence. It requires obedience to reality. Start before you feel ready. Start before you feel capable. Start while doubting yourself, because the only version of you that ever changes anything is the one who acts before feeling ready. And if you keep waiting for that future version to arrive first, you'll be waiting for the rest of your life. This is where most people lose their lives quietly, not through failure, not through tragedy, but through comfort. Slow, invisible comfort that feels harmless in the moment and catastrophic in the long run. You don't consciously say, I choose comfort over my future. You say things that sound reasonable. I stump tired. I shall do it tomorrow. I deserve a break. Now isn't it the right time? Each sentence feels small. Each choice feels justified. Together they form a life that never moves. Comfort is dangerous because it doesn't feel like self-destruction. It feels like self-care. It feels like rest. It feels like balance. But there is a difference between recovery and avoidance, and most people blur that line on purpose. Real rest prepares you to act again. Comfort keeps you passive. Look closely at your daily life, not your goals, not your intentions, your actual behaviors. The shows you watch, the scrolling you justify, the conversations you stay in, the habits you protect, they reveal your real priorities more, honestly, than your words ever will. You say you want change, but your schedule says you want ease. You say you want discipline, but your habits say you want relief. You say you want growth, but your routines say you want familiarity. Comfort isn't set neutral, it trains you. Every time you choose the easy option over the necessary one, you reinforce the identity of someone who escapes discomfort. Over time, discomfort starts to feel unbearable, even when it's mild. You become fragile without realizing it. That's why small tasks feel overwhelming now. It's not because they're hard, it's because you've conditioned yourself to avoid strain. Your nervous system adapts to what you repeatedly do. If you repeatedly soothe it, it becomes intolerant of pressure. If you repeatedly challenge it, it becomes resilient. Most people unknowingly train themselves to be weak. This is especially true in a world designed for comfort. Food arrives without effort. Entertainment is endless. Distraction is instant. You never have to be bored. You never have to sit with silence. You never have to push unless you choose to. And most people don't choose to. They protect their comfort like it's a right, not realizing it's the very thing stealing their future. Here's the harsh truth. Your future requires discomfort. Your present self keeps rejecting. The skills you need, the discipline you lack, the confidence you want, all of it lives on the other side of repeated discomfort. There is no shortcut. There is no alternative path. You don't become strong by staying comfortable and thinking about hardship. You become strong by voluntarily entering it. Another uncomfortable reality: comfort today creates regret tomorrow. Not dramatic regret, quiet regret. The kind that shows up late at night when distractions fade. The kind that whispers, "You could have done more." That regret is built one easy day at a time. You think you're protecting yourself when you avoid discomfort. In reality, you're postponing pain, not eliminating it. The pain of discipline is temporary. The pain of regret compounds. People who grow aren't tougher by nature. They've simply trained themselves to tolerate discomfort without running. They don't enjoy it. They don't romanticize it. They accept it as the price of becoming more. Ask yourself this honestly: how often do you choose what feels good now over what builds you later? Your phone feels good now. Focus builds later. Avoidance feels good now. Consequences come later. Comfort feels good now. Stagnation shows up later. And here's the part you may not want to admit: you know exactly where you're choosing comfort. You feel the internal hesitation every time. You feel the moment where you could push and don't. That moment is the crossroads of your life, repeated daily. Most people don't fail once, they fail quietly, consistently in those moments. This isn't about becoming extreme or punishing yourself. It's about honesty. It's about recognizing that growth requires friction and deciding to stop anesthetizing yourself against it. If your days are designed to minimize discomfort, your life will be designed to minimize growth. Your future self doesn't need more comfort from you. They need effort. They need discipline. They need you to stop choosing the easy path just because it's familiar. The uncomfortable truth is this: nothing is holding you back more than what you're protecting. And until you're willing to let go of comfort as your default setting, your future will remain permanently postponed. At some point, being human stopped meaning learning from failure and started meaning excusing it. You tell yourself that inconsistency is normal, that missing your own deadlines is understandable, that breaking promises to yourself doesn't matter because no one else is watching. That story feels compassionate. It also quietly destroys your self-respect. Every promise you make to yourself is a contract, not a dramatic one, not something written down, but a psychological agreement that says, "I can trust my own word." When you break that agreement repeatedly, something inside you weakens. You don't notice it immediately because the damage is subtle. It doesn't hurt in a loud way. It shows up as hesitation, doubt, and a quiet lack of confidence when it's time to act. You start second-guessing yourself. You stop believing your own plans. You lower your expectations because deep down you don't trust yourself to follow through. That's not laziness. That's a broken internal relationship. Most people think motivation disappears first. It doesn't. Self-trust disappears first. Motivation follows because it has nothing solid to stand on. Why would your mind feel energized to act when history tells it that you won't keep your word anyway? This is how people end up stuck in cycles of starting and stopping. They make big promises during moments of clarity, then abandon them when discomfort arrives. Instead of addressing the break, they explain it away. They say life got busy. They say they were tired. They say they needed a break. All of those may be true. None of them fix the damage. Every time you excuse a broken promise, you teach yourself that your word doesn't matter. Not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, cumulative way. Over time, you stop taking yourself seriously. You still talk about change, but your body doesn't respond with urgency because it has learned not to trust the signal. This is why discipline feels heavy for you. It's not because you lack willpower. It's because you've trained yourself to ignore your own commitments. Discipline cannot exist where self-respect has been eroded. There is another layer to this that people rarely acknowledge. Breaking promises to yourself creates internal friction. One part of you wants to move forward. Another part remembers past failures and resists. That resistance shows up as procrastination, overthinking, and emotional exhaustion. You feel tired before you even begin, because you're fighting yourself. This inner conflict drains more energy than the task itself ever would. Being human does not mean abandoning standards. It means holding yourself accountable without cruelty. There is a difference between understanding why you failed and pretending failure doesn't matter. One leads to growth. The other leads to decay. You don't rebuild self-trust by making bigger promises. You rebuild it by making smaller ones and keeping them. Simple, unglamorous commitments that feel almost too easy. When you follow through, something shifts. Your nervous system relaxes. Your mind starts to cooperate. Action feels lighter because it's no longer arguing with your past. People often try to fix inconsistency with inspiration. That never works. Inspiration is emotional. Self-trust is behavioral. It is built through evidence, not feelings. Every kept promise is a vote for the identity of someone reliable. Every broken promise is a vote against it. Over time, the votes accumulate. You become what your behavior proves. The hardest part of this lesson is accepting that no one else can repair this relationship for you. Not a coach, not a video, not a moment of motivation. The repair happens in private when you do the thing you said you would do, especially when you don't feel like it. This is not about perfection. You will fail again. That's inevitable. The difference is what you do after. Do you adjust the promise and recommit, or do you excuse and move on as if nothing happened? Your life reflects how seriously you take your own word. If your life feels unstable, scattered, or stalled, look at the promises you keep and the ones you casually break. The pattern will be obvious. Being human is not the problem. Avoiding responsibility for your own commitments is. If you want your life to change, stop making promises you won't keep. Make fewer, smaller, stricter ones. Then keep them, especially when no one is watching. That is how self-respect is rebuilt. And without self-respect, no amount of motivation will ever carry you forward. Blame is one of the most comforting habits you have. It gives you relief without requiring change. It lets you explain why your life looks the way it does, without forcing you to confront the part you play in maintaining it. And the more intelligent you are, the better you become at justifying it. You can point to your upbringing, your environment, your lack of support, the economy, your past relationships, your mental state, your responsibilities. Some of these explanations are real. Some of them are painful. None of them are a strategy. There is a difference between understanding where you came from and living there permanently. Most people confuse the two. At first, circumstances genuinely shape you. You don't choose your childhood. You don't choose certain limitations. You don't choose the initial conditions of your life. But there comes a moment, usually earlier than people want to admit, where circumstances stop being the primary force and your responses take over. That moment is where responsibility begins. The problem is that responsibility is heavier than blame. Blame feels passive. Responsibility demands action. So people cling to circumstances long after they've stopped being relevant. They rehearse the same explanations year after year, not realizing those explanations are now part of the problem. When you keep blaming circumstances, you quietly tell yourself that change requires the world to shift before you do. That belief is paralyzing. It makes progress conditional. It keeps your life on hold. Look closely at the people who actually transform their lives. They don't deny hardship. They simply refuse to let it be the final authority. They ask a different question. Not why did this happen to me, but what do I do now? That question changes everything. Blame keeps you facing backward. Responsibility forces you to face forward. One anchors you to the past. The other creates a future. There is another uncomfortable truth here. At some point, blaming circumstances becomes a way to protect your identity. If your life hasn't changed because of external factors, then you don't have to confront the possibility that you've avoided growth. You don't have to face your own hesitation, inconsistency, or fear. Circumstances become a shield. This is why people get defensive when blame is challenged. You're not just questioning their explanation. You're threatening the structure that protects them from accountability. And here's the hardest part to accept: even when circumstances are unfair, they still don't excuse stagnation. Life does not pause its expectations because your situation is difficult. Time continues, opportunities pass, consequences accumulate. This doesn't mean being harsh with yourself, it means being honest. Ask yourself how long you've been using the same reasons. If the explanation hasn't changed in years, it's no longer an explanation, it's an identity. I can instead because becomes who you are. Blame also quietly drains your power. Every time you attribute your lack of progress to something outside you, you give away control. You tell yourself that improvement is dependent on forces you cannot influence. That belief kills initiative. Why try if the outcome isn't in your hands? Responsibility does the opposite. It's heavy, but it's empowering. It says, this is mine to deal with. Even if the situation isn't your fault, the response is still your responsibility. That distinction is everything. Most people wait for circumstances to improve before they act. People who grow act and force circumstances to adapt. That doesn't happen overnight. It happens through small, repeated decisions that compound quietly. Another reason blame is so seductive is that it creates community. Shared blame bonds people. Complaining feels like connection. Victimhood feels validating. But it's a dead end. You can feel understood and still be stuck. Progress is often lonely because it requires stepping away from narratives that keep everyone comfortable. You don't outgrow circumstances by denying them. You outgrow them by building skills, habits, and discipline that make them less relevant. You don't escape limitations by resenting them. You escape by becoming stronger than they are. At some point, you must stop asking whether your situation is fair and start asking whether you're willing to remain defined by it. Your life will not expand until your sense of responsibility expands with it. Blame keeps you small because it tells you that power lives elsewhere. Responsibility forces you to reclaim that power, one uncomfortable decision at a time. You can keep explaining why things are hard, or you can start doing the work that makes those explanations irrelevant. Circumstances may have shaped your starting point, but they do not get to decide your ending unless you let them. This is where most self-improvement fails, and it fails quietly. People focus on outcomes while protecting the identity that created their current life. They want new results without becoming a new person. That doesn't work, and it never has. Your life is not built on your goals, it's built on your identity. How you see yourself determines how you behave, what you tolerate, and what you repeat. Until that changes, everything else is temporary. You can force yourself to act for a while. You can push through a week of discipline. You can ride a wave of motivation. But if your identity stays the same, you will eventually return to familiar behaviors. Not because you're weak, but because humans seek consistency with who they believe they are. If you see yourself as someone who tries, you will try. If you see yourself as someone who tries, you will try. If you see yourself as someone who tries, you will try. If you see yourself as someone who tries to bad with discipline, you will unconsciously prove that story true. Most people don't realize how often they reinforce these identities through language. The things you say casually matter. That's just how I am. I've always been like this. I'm not disciplined. These aren't descriptions. They're commitments. Every time you repeat them, you tighten the cage. You say you want change, but you protect the old version of yourself because it's familiar. Familiar feels safe even when it's miserable. Change threatens identity. It forces you to let go of stories you've told yourself for years. Stories that explain your behavior and soften your failures. That loss is uncomfortable, so people resist it without realizing that resistance is the real reason they're stuck. Here's the truth: most people avoid real change requires mourning who you used to be. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, honest way. You have to admit that some versions of you are no longer acceptable. Some habits, reactions, and excuses have to die. And death, even of old identities, is painful. This is why people sabotage themselves after initial progress. The behavior starts changing, but the identity doesn't catch up. Eventually, the internal tension becomes unbearable, and they return to what feels like themselves. To change permanently, identity must lead behavior, not follow it. You don't wait until you feel like a disciplined person. You act like one until the identity forms. Identity is built through evidence. Repeated behavior creates proof. Proof rewrites self-image. That's the order. Not affirmations. Not visualization. Not self-talk alone. You become disciplined by acting disciplined long enough that your mind accepts it as truth. Another mistake people make is trying to change everything at once. That overwhelms identity. The mind rebels. Instead, identity shifts through small, consistent actions that contradict the old story. One kept promise. One uncomfortable decision. One moment where you choose differently than you used to. Over time, these moments accumulate and force a redefinition. You no longer have to convince yourself you've changed. Your behavior makes the argument for you. There's also a social cost to identity change that people don't talk about. When you change, relationships shift, expectations change. Some people become uncomfortable because your growth highlights their stagnation. This pressure tempts you to return to who you were, so everything feels balanced again. If you're not prepared for this, you will sabotage your own progress to preserve social harmony. That's why identity change requires solitude and internal clarity. You must decide who you are becoming before the world reacts. The hardest part of this lesson is accepting that wanting change is irrelevant. Everyone wants change. Very few are willing to become someone unfamiliar to get it. Your current identity got you here. It cannot take you further. That doesn't mean it's bad. It means it's incomplete. If you want a different life, you must be willing to let go of the version of you that feels comfortable but limited. You must act in ways that feel not like you at first. That discomfort is not a warning. It's confirmation that identity is shifting. Until you accept this, every attempt at change will be temporary. You'll improve, then regress, try again, then stall, not because you lack effort, but because you refuse the deeper transformation. Lasting change begins the moment you stop asking how to get new results and start asking who you must become to sustain them. That question is uncomfortable. It's also the only one that works. You don't avoid solitude because you dislike being alone. You avoid it because solitude removes your escape routes. When you are alone, there is no one to distract you, no one to blame, no one to perform for, and no noise to hide behind. Solitude forces you to confront the one person you've been avoiding this entire time yourself. When you're alone, your patterns become obvious, your inconsistencies surface, your excuses lose their audience. The stories you tell yourself don't sound as convincing in silence. That's uncomfortable. So you fill every gap. You keep something playing in the background. You keep scrolling. You stay busy. You stay connected. Anything to avoid stillness. Busyness has become your shield. Most people don't realize how much of their identity is maintained through distraction. When life is noisy, you can delay responsibility indefinitely. You can tell yourself you'll think about things later. Later never comes, because later requires quiet. Solitude strips away self-deception. In silence, you feel the weight of what you've been postponing. You remember the promises you broke. You see the gap between who you say you are and how you actually live. That gap creates discomfort, and instead of closing it through action, most people escape it through stimulation. That's why solitude feels heavy to you. Not because something is wrong, but because something is unresolved. People often say they are afraid of loneliness, but what they are really afraid of is accountability. Accountability means there is no external excuse left. It means your progress or lack of it belongs entirely to you. That realization is confronting. So you surround yourself with people. You stay available. You stay online. You stay entertained. You convince yourself you're connected, when in reality, you're avoiding confrontation with your own standards. Here's the truth. Growth requires periods of isolation, not permanent withdrawal, not cutting yourself off from the world, but intentional solitude where reflection turns into decision. Every meaningful shift in identity happens in moments where no one is watching. In solitude, you can't outsource responsibility, you can't borrow energy from others, you can't blame circumstances. You either act or you don't. That clarity is threatening to the version of you that wants comfort without change. This is why people fear being alone with their thoughts. Thoughts expose patterns, patterns demand correction. Another uncomfortable reality is that solitude reveals what actually matters to you. When distractions fall away, you see where your attention naturally goes. You see what you prioritize when no one is rewarding or judging you. That honesty is rare, and most people avoid it their entire lives. They confuse loneliness with emptiness, when in reality loneliness is often the first stage of clarity. Solitude also removes social comparison, which many people secretly rely on. When others are around, you can measure yourself against them and feel acceptable. When you're alone, comparison disappears, and only your own standards remain. If those standards are unmet, there is nowhere to hide. That's why solitude feels harsh. It doesn't flatter you. But here's what most people don't understand. Solitude is not meant to shame you. It's meant to sharpen you. It's the environment where honesty replaces noise and intention replaces reaction. People who grow intentionally schedule solitude. They don't wait for it. They create space to think, to evaluate, to decide. They understand that without silence, life becomes reactive. You spend your days responding instead of directing. Avoiding solitude keeps you emotionally immature because it keeps you externally regulated. You rely on others, content, or stimulation to manage your internal state. Solitude forces you to regulate yourself. That skill changes everything. When you can sit alone without escaping, you gain control over your impulses. You stop needing constant reassurance. You stop seeking validation to feel stable. You start acting from principle instead of mood. Most people never develop this because they never stay long enough in silence to let discomfort pass. They assume discomfort means something is wrong. In reality, discomfort is simply the nervous system adjusting to honesty. Solitude doesn't make you weak. Avoiding it does. If you want real change, you must be willing to face yourself without distraction. You must be willing to sit with the truth long enough to do something about it. Not once. Repeatedly. Your life reflects the conversations you're willing to have with yourself in private. If you keep avoiding those conversations, nothing will change, no matter how much information you consume. Solitude is not the enemy. It sits the mirror. And until you're willing to look into it without flinching, you will keep running in circles, surrounded by noise, wondering why your life never moves forward. Here is the truth: without comfort and without decoration, your life is not stuck because you lack knowledge, opportunity, or potential. It is stuck because you have been avoiding responsibility for what you already know you must do. Nothing in this video was new to you. That is important. If it felt heavy, it's because it confirmed what you've been quietly aware of for a long time. The problem was never information. It was execution. It was consistency. It was the refusal to let go of comfort, excuses, and familiar versions of yourself. The problem has always been you, and that is not an insult. It is the only position of power you have. If someone else were responsible, you would be helpless. But you are not helpless. You are just undisciplined where it matters most and honest only when it's convenient. That can change, but only if you stop negotiating with yourself. No more waiting to feel ready, no more blaming circumstances, no more pretending awareness is enough, no more breaking promises and calling it normal, no more protecting comfort while your future erodes. Change will not arrive with motivation, it will arrive the moment you decide to act without it. You don't need to become perfect. You need to become consistent. You don't need a new identity. You need to live in alignment with the standards you already claim to have. If this message made you uncomfortable, that's good. Discomfort is the signal that truth has landed. What you do next determines whether this was just another video you agreed with, or the moment your life actually began to change. No one is coming. No excuse remains. The responsibility is yours.